Thank you so much for joining us for Next Up. Bill and I welcoming you. And this is the program, the second half of Donnybrook, where we talk about important regional topics with community leaders. Today our topic is important and it's also disturbing. The Anti-Defamation League this year reported that anti-Semitic incidents in 2021 actually were the highest on record, averaging 7 per day in the United States. And we've seen some anti-Semitic behavior recently in the news, so we thought we'd invite Rabbi Susan Talve from Central Reformed Congregation in St. Louis back to 9 PBS. Rabbi, thank you very much for joining Bill and me. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is a disturbing topic when we find out that there are an average 7 anti-Semitic incidents per day in the United States.
Yeah. You know, 1 out of 4 Jewish people will tell you that they've had some form of aggression, especially in the past years. And it's even worse on college campuses, which I think is really important to note because, you know, kids on campuses, you'd think that would be the most open place and a place, you know, where ideas are flourished and people can talk about their differences. But instead, the anti-Semitism is so bad on college campuses that kids are really just hiding because they're afraid of violence.
Rabbi Susan, first of all, thanks for all the good you do. I know people that you have helped in the community in your quiet way, so thanks for that. And as long as it's almost election day, let's talk about politics a little bit. As I'm sure you know, last year there was an effort in the House to strip Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committeeships, of her participation in committees, because of some tweets that she had made, including one in which she suggested there's evidence that Jewish people, the Rosenthals, had started the California wildfires, possibly with space rays for financial gain. And Representative Ann Wagner from the county voted against sanctioning Marjorie Taylor Greene and explained that, first of all, those tweets were old and were already out there when Marjorie Taylor Greene ran for office, and secondly, that while Ann Wagner is against anti-Semitism, and she didn't think that Marjorie Taylor Greene really believed that stuff either. At the time, I thought to myself, we've entered dangerous times when a reasonable politician, and I always have thought of Ann Wagner as reasonable, won't come out against somebody who's clearly anti-Semitic. And I didn't write about it or anything. And I picked up the paper this morning and read about the reopening of the Holocaust Museum. And the story mentioned that Ann Wagner was one of the speakers. You know, she's the congresswoman out there, and apparently she helped get some money. And the whole thing kind of confused me. And I wondered to myself, is it, I mean, I understand the politics of it. You know, everybody, all the Republicans who did vote got primaried out. In the politics of today, is it unrealistic to expect a politician to stand up against anti-Semitism? And how should the rest of us handle it? If we hear or see somebody saying something anti-Semitic, should we just let it go, or what?
I would hope not. And I think that it's such an important conversation because it's not just about anti-Semitism. You know, anti-Semitism is one of the oldest hates there is. And when we have an uptick in anti-Semitism, you can be sure that everybody's rights are on the line, and that what's called the Christian nationalist movement, that's neither Christian or nationalist, right, has a political agenda. And you're right to say this is political. It's all political. And what's getting lost in the conversation is the truth. And so when you see Ann Wagner kind of selling out here or compromising, now it's not making consensus, right? It's compromising her own values because, she is a reasonable person, and so when she doesn't call out anti-Semitism, when she sees it, when she knows it's right, it's for political opportunistic reasons, and that's just not okay. I mean, that's why we're in this serious situation that we're in now.
Well, she has called out anti-Semitism, but she just couldn't bring herself to vote against Marjorie Taylor Greene. And,
right.
in a way, who can blame her? I mean, she's in a safe Republican district, and had she done it, she would have been primaried, and as it is now, she's cruising to a victory Tuesday night.
But no, can I just jump in
Yes.
briefly? Because I want to bring up Representative Cori Bush.
I was going to bring her up in a minute.
Well, Representative Cori Bush has as one of her fundraising colleagues, Naveen Ayesh, who in previous life, she tweeted some very anti-Semitic language, saying you can't trust Jews, and she
Right.
wishes everyone in Israel would burn. And to date,
Yeah.
I don't think Representative Cori Bush has denounced that language. And there's some other issues, too, where she has refused to give an interview to the Jewish Light. As of recently, I don't know if she's changed that. So there are some issues here that I think it's both sides. In many ways,
It is.
we're seeing
I had made a note about Miss Ayesh that one of the things she wrote was, I want to set Israel on fire with my own hand and watch it burn to ashes. And I was going to ask you, Rabbi Susan, you're in the 1st District. Your synagogue is in the 1st
Right, we are.
District. You live in the
Bush.
1st District. So do I. Have you had any occasion to talk with Cori Bush, who's our representative? And what kind of dialogue do you have with her on stuff like this?
So I also know Naveen very well. I know Naveen Ayesh, and when you talk to her about the comments that she made, she'll say, I was young, you know, I grew up in the West Bank, I was profiled there, I, you know, suffered under the occupation, my family suffers under the occupation, and that's what that came out of. Today, Naveen is a different person, and I've had her speak to my confirmation classes. I've had her speak to my 10th grade about her experience because, again, this is about dialogue. This is about not demonizing each other, right? And that's what anti-Semitism does. It preys on dehumanizing people and demonizing people and making other of a group of people for people's own opportunism, their own political, you know,
Right.
clauses. And you know, that's what happened. You know, I hate to bring him up if you're not going to, but that's what happened with Kanye. You know, what's he thinking? You know, you can't get those words back. And Naveen knows that too. I mean, she said some terrible things, and I understand where they're coming from. And we've had some serious conversations about that. And you know, she's like a daughter to me in many ways, and she knows I love Israel. And we talk about it. And I think that's what saves us. That's what will save us.
You know, one of the big problems is whether it's Kanye West,
Yeah.
who I think is mentally ill, so there is
For
that.
sure. Yes.
But he does say these anti-Jewish things. And then now we recently have Kyrie Irving of the New York Nets, Brooklyn Nets, and he retweeted a promotion for a movie that's called From Hebrews to Negroes, Black America, Wake Up. He's later apologized, and he's written a $500,000 check to the Anti-Defamation League. But the ADL has found when people of that stature,
Yeah.
and by the way, some of these guys have more followers on Twitter than there are Jews in the United States, 15
right.
million, right?
More Jews in the world.
They have,
Right.
in the world, right? They have found that anti-Semitic incidents occur. And so this language is really dangerous.
Yeah, you can't delete a tweet. You really can't. And I think that's really important. And I think we have to look at social media and what kind of damage it's doing. But we also have to be smart about why and where this is coming from and what it feels like to be the canary in the coal mine, saying this isn't just about us. You know, when Clayton High School is banning books, you know, something is wrong,
Right.
right? We're missing something, and people are scared, and you know the power people on the top that you know put 6 Supreme Court justices right in power, the Federalist Society and groups like that are power people, are preying on the fears and the frustrations of people who don't feel like they have a voice. So I think we have to really look at that and try to understand where they're coming from.
You know, there's a website or True News, not TRUE, but TRU News, who, you know, broke the story that Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli agent and all sorts of nonsense. And They called the impeachment a Jew coup, and the White House rewarded them with credentials. And it confuses someone like me because I think, well, as much as I don't like Donald Trump, Jared Kushner is Jewish and Ivanka Trump is Jewish. What's going on, Rabbi Susan?
That's a really good question, and it's not neat and it doesn't make sense. And something that I've experienced from the extreme left, and also the extreme right, is to be a good Jew for the extreme left is different than to be a good Jew for the extreme right. And that's something that we experience too. There are good Jews and there are not so good Jews, and there are bad Jews, because everybody always knows one Jew that they like. So that's how they get around that. They say there's good Jews, and the good Jews on the left are anti-occupation and
Right.
the whole kind of far left agenda. I'm anti-occupation too, but I'm also pro-Israel, pro-peace. So there's an and here where we have to figure out how we're going to live together. And then all the way on the right, to be a good Jew is to be an Orthodox Jew, and to be a right-wing Jew that buys into the cultural agenda that's preying on the fears, of the people that I think the people on the top are trying to manipulate. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, I guess some Christians in our audience and others might be surprised when they learn that just about every synagogue in the world has armed protection during its services, wherever you go.
That's right.
And sometimes Jews hoping to pray together abroad can't find the temple or synagogue because it's unmarked for security reasons.
Not only that, you can't get in unless you've made arrangements before, and you can prove who you are, and you still have to get through armed guards any place in the world. And here as well, we're spending so much money on security. It's really one of our biggest budget items right now. We have to, keep it safe. We had metal detectors for the high holidays. The St. Louis Jewish community does actually a really wonderful thing. We have a security person. We have an office of security, so that we have someone who is in touch with the FBI, in touch with police and everybody else, and monitoring social media, so that if something looks funny, we all know about it. We're all on this big, network of information, and we actually have an amazing person who monitors all of this for us. So when, we had this...
Does he find much?
Oh, yeah, there's so much. Oh, my God. There's so much. We get there are incident reports quite often these days.
And are they violent incident, or are they hateful comments or stereotypical comments, or?
They're warnings, things like, so there was a suspicious car that had hate speech, anti-Semitic hate speech, racist hate speech, written all over it, hanging out outside a Jewish school. So all of it, we all heard about it. We're on watching for it. I think some of what happens is really deterring some of the violence that we might be seeing here. There was the guy who just came up for trial, who made a threat against CRC, was a year ago, and he's going to prison because he told us he was going to blow us up on Saturday morning, and they took him seriously.
Rabbi Susan, I read a column, it might have been in the Post-Dispatch, I forget where, recently, from a Jewish man who wrote that all of a sudden there's conversation about where we might go. That Jewish people, for the first time in his memory, in the United States, are talking about maybe having to leave for safety reasons. Have you heard talk like that?
Sure. Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the head of the ADL, I heard him say not too long ago, and I think I heard it on the news again today, just driving here. He said, we've been saying never again. We're in never. That's how dangerous he thinks the rhetoric and the hate speech and the potential violence is. I mean, when you saw January 6th, people with Nazi, swastikas on them talking about, Camp Auschwitz, you know, you got to take that seriously. I mean, just October 27th was the anniversary of the Eitz Chaim synagogue, where, you know, the same young, I mean, they even look the same. The same young man that shot up the worshipers on Saturday morning, on Shabbat morning, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, wasn't the same guy, but the same profile as the guy who killed the people at Mother Emanuel Church, right? The same guy who was listening to these tweets, these untruths about the stolen election. I mean, we know all the lies, right, about CRT, which is, you know, isn't, when people see CRT, it's not CRT, critical race theory, it's everything that they've attached to it. And the same guy that went into that grocery store in Buffalo and killed black people. It's the same profile, you know, so yes, we're afraid. We're afraid right now. And I grew up, I'm gonna be 70, and I grew up with parents who lived through World War II. I was born right after. I grew up with the trope, if it happened in Germany, it could happen anywhere. So we've always thought about, where would we go?
Well, let me ask you to address, though, a lot of these anti-Semitic incidents that are happening in places like Crown Heights. And you talk to people there, and they'll tell you they're not perpetrated by white nationalists.
No.
Who don't live there. The residents there who are, you know, maybe knocking down someone or yelling something hateful, are probably not persuaded by Donald Trump or white nationalists.
Right.
I mean, so what do you explain? Is it Louis Farrakhan, a Nation of Islam, or is it Kanye West, or what explains these attacks from the other side?
It's a very good question. And again, I think when we look at it as, again, anti-Semitism is one of the oldest hates and what fuels it, then it makes sense to think that a group that's oppressed is going to look for a scapegoat, you know? And when they're fed rhetoric, right? When they're fed lies about, you know, all the tropes that you know, Jews taking over the world, you know, protocols of the elders of Zion, stuff, you know, if you're fed this rhetoric that, you know, about Jewish people, and also, I have to say, you know, part of the rhetoric, part of the propaganda, maybe we have to call it propaganda because it's on purpose, that Hitler used was, you know, those Jews, they killed your God, they killed Christ, you know, and so that's another trope that gets used against Jews. That's, you know, it's not helpful. It's hurtful, and it turns into violence. Right.
What about alliances with other minorities in this country, like with blacks and Latinos? Is there any kind of coming together, Rabbi Susan, or is it friction or what?
Well, no, there is coming together. I think that, you know, Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL, you know, one of the most important, I think, organizations right now is the Poor People's Campaign, and, you know, think grassroots groups that won't be, that really are trying to bring people together, right? There are alliances. My whole life has been built on making friends. That's why we're in the city. You know, I remember one of the protests. I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it might have been the McCluskey one when they had the guns.
Your neighbor.
Yeah, my neighbor. I couldn't be there that night, and people from the Black Lives Matter movement called me and said, "Don't worry, Rabbi, we got your back. We'll keep the synagogue safe." You know, because they knew it wasn't just protesters out there who never would have hurt us, but there were other people who used those opportunities to do terrible things. Right?
You know, today it was reported that the FBI has issued a warning that there's a credible threat against synagogues in New Jersey. And so it's unfortunately a very relevant topic that we're discussing today. As a non-Jew, I have a question.
Sure.
And that is, isn't it important for us as non-Jews, if we see or hear anti-Semitic language or behavior, to condemn it immediately. Kind of getting back to Ann Wagner and Marjorie Taylor Greene, or Cori Bush and Naveen Ayesh, or as we discussed on a recent Donnybrook, Eric Schmidt and Kanye West. If someone, however close you are to that person or however much you want to gain favor from that person, says or does something that approaches anti-Semitism, you got to stand up and say, hey, that's wrong. I think Jimmy Carter did that when he condemned the Ku Klux Klan, which could have been a constituency for him in 1976.
Right.
But
he wasn't an opportunist.
Yeah, I
He
think
was
that
a decent person.
that backbone is necessary among non-Jews. But first of all, people have to have information about it.
Yes.
So there's that. You have to follow the news. But our leaders have to take a stand.
I'll tell you the other thing. Yes, I'm totally with you there, and I think if we don't, we're in big trouble, and people do need to speak up. When you see something, say something, because it can turn into something that really could hurt your neighbor. But I also want to say, you know, I grew up in New York. I was a kid growing up in a suburb of New York, and I'm just telling this to my grandchildren. So I remember being in like middle school and being out with my friends for Halloween, and we walked by things you remember, you know. We walked by a house that was dark, and my friends said, oh, they must be Jews. And I went, what? I said, wait a minute. They said, oh, not you, but they must be Jews, because they had this implicit bias built into them, where it wasn't about me, their friend, but it was. They didn't realize what they were doing, that they were putting me at risk, my family. And that's what we've allowed to happen. We've allowed implicit and explicit bias to grow in this country against people of color, against Latinos, brown people, black people, Jews, and the queer community as well. And in the indigenous, I mean, we're allowing it to, because we have a principle in Judaism called Shalom Bayit, keep peace in your house. I wonder if Jared and Ivanka had to do that. I don't know, you know, what the deal is there, but that doesn't make sense to me, to your point. But there's a time for peace in the house, and there's a time when keeping that kind of peace is going to get us all in trouble and get us all killed.
Hey, Rabbi Susan, I have another question.
Sure.
I don't know much about evangelicism, but I keep reading that evangelical Christians have a deep connection to Israel because of the end of days. And are they considered friends of the Jewish people, or is there a little bit of wariness there?
Not by me.
The wariness or the friends?
The friends.
Okay.
Because I understand where they're coming from. You know, they are supporting Israel as a right-wing country that they need the Jews to return to so that the second coming will come. That's part of their ideology. And not all of them, but basically. Right. And so what does that do? It's furthering right-wing, you know, feelings in Israel that I think are keeping, you know, Israelis and Palestinians from finding a solution to living together. Because, you know, they're the evangelical, that group of evangelical Christians. You know, evangelical really is just the Greek word for the gospel, right? And it's important because to understand who they are today, because what they want, and we have a senator who has said this is what he wants, is to have a Christian nation that is run by the Gospels, right? That the basic foundation of this nation is the Bible, their Bible, and their understanding of the Bible, which is, you know, kind of a skewed understanding if you really study it anyway. But
aren't we painting with a little bit of a broad brush, because aren't there many conservative fundamental Christians who have a great love for Judaism and respect
love Israel,
the religion greatly?
Absolutely. No question about that. You know, when I say some of my best friends, no, but I mean, I really do mean that. I mean, my ministry in St. Louis, my friends, the people I work with the most are mostly Christian ministers, right? Because we do the work in the city. I mean, standing on the front lines of Ferguson, and right now we've been setting up clinics to make sure people get photo IDs, because, you know, they're trying to keep certain people from voting. And that whole voting thing is part of this whole problem as well, that, you know, Jews are finding ourselves in this mix of just anti-human behavior that makes other of people and is causing all kinds of problems.
Well, as a political moderate, it really seems to me that, you know, the moderate Democrats and the old school Republicans, we didn't have these problems. I mean, it's the MAGA people and the progressives who seem to be more against the Jewish people. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't remember a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment among my friends, all of whom were Christians. I think we had one Jewish kid. What do you think about that?
With about 30 seconds to go.
Well, that's a lot, but it has changed. This past former president, you know, unleashed a lot of, maybe really what he did was the same thing that maybe Ferguson did. He took the scab off a festering wound, and now it's up to us to do the healing. So it's there. It's always been there under the surface, and now we really see it, and it's scary. But I believe, you know, I believe that we do have the relationships, and we are building the coalitions, and I believe that we have enough friends that, you know, they're going to get our backs, and we're going to work together for each other's benefit.
Rabbi Talve, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Next Up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.